Join me in welcoming Sam Williams to the TEDxAtlanta stage.
Great. Thank you very much. We've heard a lot lately about CEOs who made bad decisions that cost us as a nation, whether they were in the Gulf or whether they were on Wall Street. And what I want to talk about is CEOs playing a role in solving decisions instead of bad decisions. Now, like a lot of cities, Atlanta has been through a lot of change. We've made a lot of decisions as a city. You heard about a few of those today. And they've helped us become where we are today. And what I want to do is run through with you 150 years, take a deep breath because it's going to be 1 minute long, to talk about some of those critical things that happened in Metro Atlanta's destiny. Number one, you don't get any worse disaster than having your city burned to the ground in the Civil War. That's the roundhouse. We are sitting in the rebuilt roundhouse at this moment. And 25 years after that, the business and civic and philanthropic community got together and created the Cotton States Exposition, a World's Fair, if you will, that said, Atlanta is reopened for business, the war is over, we forgot about it, let's go make money. The next thing we did is the 1920s and 1930s, Atlanta became more of an industrial town, shaking off its agricultural roots. And of course, we became the city too busy to hate when the rest of the nation, particularly in the South, was obsessed with that. And then, finally, we won the Olympics and we became the global international capital we are. Whew, okay, there's 150 years in 1 minute. Now, there were some patterns in this. How did we do that? How did those things happen? And what I would say that the pattern was that we had business executives partnering with government and civic leaders willing to lay out a plan and follow it and make it happen, to sell it. I really call these kinds of CEOs urban statesmen. I'm going to run through 3 case studies of urban statesmen that I personally worked on. The first one was in 1972. I was a kid out of graduate school coming back here. School desegregation, busing was going on. It was rampant. It was a very emotional issue. There was white flight to the suburbs. There were demonstrations. I remember having a friend who was a young banker, had a cross burned on his lawn because he was a member of the school board and he wanted to stop busing. I thought the days of the Klan were over. I was shocked. I couldn't believe how this was so fervent in people's emotion. Simultaneous with that, a group of business and civic leaders, 12 African Americans and 12 whites, got together, called themselves the Atlanta Action Forum, and said, once a month we're going to meet and we're going to talk about biracial problems, how to solve them. Well, I was a young kid taking notes for the group as a job with Research Atlanta, sitting in the back room watching all these giants interact with each other. They asked us as a staff to tackle this problem of school busing. So one of my cohorts, that's not me, but my hair was longer then, we sat down and started looking at the facts. What were the facts about racial population? Which schools were predominantly black? Which ones were predominantly white? Which ones were integrated? And where were the busing routes? In other words, let's try to get away from the emotion. Let's talk about the facts of the matter. And then talk to both sides, the NAACP and the Atlanta School Board, about what is it that you desire. Well, it quickly became obvious in some of these meetings with the Action Forum. Dr. Benjamin Mays, who was president of the school board, president of Morehouse College, said basically we want to end busing. The NAACP, headed by Lonnie King, who was previously head of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, said basically we want to have the right for a black superintendent to be hired because this is a white-only school system in the administration. Well, with those things on the table, this biracial group of leaders had a meeting with Judge Griffin Bell. Judge Griffin Bell was a learned federal scholar. He later became Attorney General under Jimmy Carter. And I remember sitting in the room, again, over in the corner taking notes, when these 12 white and 12 black leaders sat in there and unfolded this case, and they had the school board members and the NAACP leaders sitting there. And they asked Judge Bell, said, Judge Bell, What's your advice? How do we end this confrontation? And I remember Judge Bell said very cryptically in his southern drawl of Valdosta, Georgia, saying, well, I tell folks that you dismiss your attorneys and the principals sit in the room and you say what you want and you see if you can reach a meeting of the minds. Well, there was dead silence. I didn't know what was going to happen. I couldn't believe the tension and that this was the final moment of, okay, is this going to break or make or what's going to happen? And then simultaneously both sides absolutely said, we want to solve this problem. We're tired of this. What do we do? And the two groups sat down, worked intensely for a week, again with facts and research, developed a strategy. The school board adopted it, the NAACP adopted it, and the school busing ended. Then the national NAACP was angry because they didn't want the local chapter to have the right to solve this legal dispute. They actually sued the local chapter trying to revoke their charter, but the court held in favor of the local chapter. The crisis was resolved. Atlanta moved on. Not too many years ago, Grady Hospital, one of the biggest charity hospitals in the nation, 1,500 beds. It serves 1 million people a year. It trains over 1/4 of all the doctors who now reside across the state of Georgia. Threatened with closure, on the verge of bankruptcy. But the real question in many cases was, who really cared if Grady closed? Certainly the indigent people who would not have care would, but guess who else cared? These private hospitals 30, 40, 50 miles away from Atlanta, because what would happen is the 1 million patients would create a tsunami wave going out of saying we have to be cared for in some medical facility. So suddenly we found that other hospitals were ready to talk about the consequences of saving Grady. But this had gone on for 10 years. It was like crying wolf, and we had to show with beyond any doubt that this was really true. Grady's going to close this time. And step forward 3 leaders. Tom Bell, president of Cousins Properties, Pete Carell, recently retired from Georgia Pacific as chairman, and Michael Russell, head of one of the largest African-American construction firms in the nation. And their number one job was convincing people, Grady's going to close, folks. We're really serious. This is it. It's not going to last another year. Here's a scorecard that ran in the New York Times about that time, and it was not something you want to read if you go in as a patient, on the financial and the patient quality care that Grady was offering. We worked with consulting firms, Alvarez and Marcel, Deloitte and Touche, gathering facts again, presenting those, financial information, medical information, in a large task force, open to the public. Everybody heard it all at the same time. It took these cold, hard facts to convince people that we were indeed what I call at the tipping point. This was irreversible. It would tip and not come back. Well, it doesn't do any good in some of these issues from our experience until you know that the issue is really ripe. It's going to fall, and we had to prove that, and we'd seen that couldn't happen earlier. But in 2007, the Greater Grady Task Force proved that case, presented its case to elected officials in the city and county government and the state legislature. The rest is history. The board of directors was changed. Political appointees were no longer serving. Grady got a $200 million grant from private foundations, another $130 million from philanthropy and business and civic leaders, and today, Grady's in the black. It turned a profit for the first time in 40 years or more. It demonstrates also this case study, I think, of choosing the right leader to head this task force in the person of Pete Carell. He was respected. He could bring people together in the big tent of all advocates from all parts of this argument. And after the restructure, it obviously proved that the right thing was done. But remember, choosing the right leader is critical. Water. Tad mentioned this in his talk, but You know, you can do without a lot of things in a metro area. Water's not one of them. Traffic, you can get a migraine headache, but water is going to give you worse than a heart attack if they shut it off. Well, last year, Atlanta got a wake-up call. We were told by the federal district judge of the fight going on between Alabama, Florida, and Georgia for 22 years in the court over how much water Metro Atlanta could get for drinking out of Lake Lanier. The judge said, basically, we're not even going to talk about how much water you get. You have no right to any water for drinking at all. That's not why Congress created this lake. The drinking water was not in the law. So the judge said, you got 3 years, or I'm going to cut your water off. You'll go back to 1972 levels of withdrawal, which would literally choke Metro Atlanta's economy as well as its quality of life. Now, the judge even said in his ruling, this is a draconian ruling. And that phrase really proved again the tipping point was here. This was not an insignificant issue that could be ignored. And in every crisis like that, there's an opportunity. The opportunity of the crisis helps you get everybody in the room together who previously wouldn't even speak to each other. So creating a huge task force, including a lot of parties from across the state. The governor appointed this task force of John Brock at Coca-Cola Enterprises, Tim Lowe at Lowe Engineering, and appointed Mike Garrett with Georgia Power Company to negotiate with the other states while this task force looked at ways to solve this problem. It was 80 business and civic and academic leaders. We had Boston Consulting Group, again, professional people, fact-based. One of the things we also asked the consultants is, tell us how bad it's going to get if we don't do anything. What's the downside? What's the consequence of inaction? The consultants came back and said $27 billion a year to your local economy. And I remember John Brock said, it doesn't matter if it's 20 billion or 40 billion, it's a number that we simply cannot ignore. So that was the motivation underlying this thing. And out of that came an aggressive program of water conservation. Legislation was passed very quickly in this first quarter of this year in the General Assembly. There's still a lot of work to be done on capturing water and managing and distributing water in this region. But that task force, again, was a great example of how to handle that crisis. You know, a lot of people ask me, CEOs are greedy. I don't believe these CEOs are doing this for the public good. They ask me, are they doing it for profit or the public good? And my answer is the enlightened CEOs are doing it for both. They realize that if they're in a big metropolitan area and have thousands of employees, the quality of life of their workforce, indeed the profitability of their company, is affected by the destiny of the metro area they live in. And that's why I call these CEO leaders that work in this interface of public-private policy urban statesmen. Now, over the years, we've come up with what I call 5 principles of urban statesmanship. Number one, make sure the issue you're dealing with is truly at a tipping point. It's going over the cliff and it's not coming back, and that you've got to be able to prove it. The other question is, can somebody else do this? Should the governor be doing this? Should Congress be doing this? Should some university do it? The hardest test of all is, what role does business have in fixing this problem? Can we make a true, unique contribution here? It's sometimes tempting to jump into issues that are premature, that may not be at a tipping point. The second thing is, choose a strong leader. You got to get a leader who is very tough-skinned, very smart, respected by many people on different sides of the issue, and who is seen as an urban statesman, a respected elder, if you will. You've got to find the right leader for the right issue at the right time. If those 3 don't coincide, you have a challenge. Find the facts. Hire the best consultants, the best technical people, the best academic people, and others to put facts on the table. I like to say, everybody's entitled to their own opinion. Everybody's not entitled to their own facts. The next is communicate the consequences. What happens if we do nothing, but also communicate the whole process that you're going through at the time so that all parties understand public meetings, disseminating information, getting out everything in simple language so that it's not too complicated for people who are not technically involved in that area to understand it. And the last is create a really clear, simple action plan. I like to say if you can't explain it to a fifth grader, you haven't worked on it long enough. You've got to be able to put it into Peter Rabbit language that gets across to the mass public and all parties affected. Now, why do we really care about this? We care about this because by 2050, 80% of the population of our country is going to live in urban areas. Problems of sustainability, problems of energy, problems of economic growth, problems of housing, aging in place are going to get more and more complex, and government by itself cannot solve the problem. We need to get the best and brightest people possible engaged in problem solving. And I think these are some of the principles of trying to get the private sector out into the public sector engaged in fixing these. And my final thought to you is that who among you are going to be urban statesmen? Thank you.